I'm Stephanie Mitchell, 34, and 8 years of marriage to James Wilson ended over tiramisu at the Westbrook Country Club. My father-in-law Robert, with his Rolex gleaming under chandelier light, slid divorce papers across the table like he was closing a business deal. They expected tears. Instead, I reached for my purse and pulled out an envelope of my own, one filled with evidence that would destroy both their reputations. The look on Robert's face when he realized I'd been 10 steps ahead all along? Absolutely priceless. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit subscribe, and settle in. This story of betrayal, secret investigations, and sweet justice will show you exactly why you should never underestimate a woman who plans ahead. I never expected to marry into the Wilson family. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, I was the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse who taught me the value of hard work and integrity. I put myself through design school at Boston University, working evenings at a home decor store and weekends as a barista. My parents couldn't afford to fund my education, but they gave me something more valuable: a moral compass and determination. By the time I met James Wilson at a charity auction for children's art education, I had just landed my first job at a small but respected interior design firm. I was 24, ambitious, and completely captivated by James's charm. He was 30, already successful as an investment banker, with dark hair, blue eyes, and a smile that made everyone in the room feel special. When he bid $3,000 on a painting I had my eye on and then gifted it to me that same night, I thought it was the most romantic gesture I'd ever experienced. "You have an eye for beauty," he told me as we exchanged numbers. "I'd love to see the world through your perspective." Our romance was a whirlwind. James took me to restaurants where the menus had no prices, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, and introduced me to a lifestyle I'd never imagined for myself. He seemed genuinely interested in my career, asking thoughtful questions about design principles and listening attentively when I explained color theories or architectural styles. 6 months in, I was head over heels in love, and by our 1-year anniversary, he was down on one knee in the Boston Public Garden, presenting a diamond ring that must have cost more than my annual salary. "You're the missing piece in my life, Stephanie," he said. "Will you make me the happiest man alive?" It was a dream come true until I met his father. Robert Wilson wasn't just wealthy, he wielded his money like a weapon. A senior partner at Wilson, Hayes and Blackwell, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, he'd built his reputation by representing corporations in ugly, high-stakes divorces and business dissolutions. He specialized in making sure his clients walked away with everything while their partners got next to nothing. At our first dinner together, he spent 20 minutes questioning me about my family background, education, and career prospects in a tone that made it clear he found me lacking. "Interior design is such a quaint profession," he remarked, swirling expensive scotch in his glass. "Not much stability there. Have you considered something more substantial?" James had laughed uncomfortably. "Dad, Stephanie is incredibly talented. Her firm just landed the Birchwood Hotel renovation." "Yes, working for someone else." Robert's smile never reached his eyes. "The Wilsons build their own legacies, son. Remember that." I should have seen it as a warning sign when James didn't defend me further. Instead, I mistook his silence for diplomacy, believing he was trying to keep peace between the two people he loved most. I was determined to win Robert over, to prove I was worthy of his son. Our wedding became the first battleground. My parents had saved $20,000, a fortune for them, to contribute to the celebration. Robert dismissed their efforts with a wave of his hand. "We'll have the reception at the Westbrook," he announced at what was supposed to be our first planning meeting. "I've already spoken with the event director. They've reserved June 15th. My mother's face fell. "But we thought, perhaps the Botanical Gardens?" Stephanie always loved. "The Westbrook is where Wilsons get married," Robert interrupted. "Tradition matters in this family." James squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. Again, I rationalized his behavior as avoiding conflict rather than recognizing it as the pattern of deference that would characterize our marriage. The wedding was beautiful, but felt more like a business merger than a celebration of love. 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met, clinked crystal glasses and discussed stock portfolios while my college friends clustered awkwardly in a corner. My parents, despite their new formal wear, looked out of place amid Robert's associates. The only moment that felt truly mine was my father's tearful toast, his voice cracking as he wished us happiness. The first 5 years of marriage had their beautiful moments. James and I bought a brownstone in Beacon Hill, with substantial help from Robert, who insisted his name be on certain documents as a precaution. I built my career methodically, eventually breaking away from my firm to start Mitchell Design Studio. James seemed proud of my success, attending client parties and recommending me to his colleagues' wives for their home renovations. Yet there were troubling signs I chose to ignore. James consulted his father on every major decision, from investments to which car to purchase. Sunday dinners at Robert's mansion were mandatory, and he used these occasions to interrogate us about our life choices. "Stephanie, I notice you've taken on that new restaurant downtown as a client," he commented once over roast beef that cost more than a week's groceries. Risky move. The restaurant industry has a 70% failure rate in the first year. Riverview has been in business for 15 years, I replied. They're just updating their interior. And they've already paid the first installment. Still, Robert persisted, diversification is key to stability. Perhaps James can advise you on more reliable client sectors. James nodded as though this made perfect sense, despite knowing nothing about interior design business strategy. That's right, honey. We should talk about your client acquisition approach. These moments accumulated slowly, like drops of water gradually eroding stone. Each time James deferred to his father instead of supporting me, each time Robert undermined my professional judgment or made snide comments about my family's middle-class background, the foundation of my marriage developed another crack. Meanwhile, my business grew despite Robert's predictions of failure. I hired 2 junior designers, then an assistant and a project manager. My portfolio expanded from residential projects to commercial spaces, boutique hotels, upscale restaurants, and executive offices. A feature in Architectural Digest brought national attention to my work, and suddenly I was turning down more projects than I accepted. My growing success seemed to trigger something in Robert. His comments became more pointed, his interference more direct. "James tells me you're considering opening a second office in New York," he said during one Sunday dinner. "That seems premature. The overhead alone would eat your profits for years." "Actually," I countered, "I've run the numbers with my business manager. With my current client waitlist and the Manhattan connections from the Architectural Digest feature, we'd be profitable within 8 months. Robert's eyes narrowed. "Business projections are notoriously optimistic. Perhaps you should focus on building more security here in Boston before overextending." Later that night, James suggested we pause the New York expansion. "Dad makes some good points about risk management," he said. "Maybe next year?" I opened the office anyway, using my own business profits rather than our joint funds. It succeeded even faster than my projections, breaking even in 6 months. When James visited the space for the first time, I caught an expression on his face I couldn't quite identify, pride mixed with something that looked unsettlingly like resentment. It was around that time that things between us began to shift. I was too busy celebrating my professional victories to notice that the foundation of my marriage was beginning to crumble beneath my feet. The first sign something was seriously wrong came 3 years ago, just after we celebrated our 5th anniversary. James started coming home later and later, his excuses varying from client meetings to traffic to impromptu drinks with colleagues. When he was home, he was distant, physically present but mentally elsewhere, constantly checking his phone and stepping out to take calls. "Everything okay at work?" I asked one night after he'd spent our entire dinner texting someone. "Fine. Just busy." His tone closed the conversation before it could begin. I told myself this was normal, 2 busy professionals navigating demanding careers. But then I noticed withdrawals from our joint account that James couldn't explain. Nothing massive at first, 500 here, 800 there, but the pattern was concerning. "I don't understand these charges from the Marriott downtown," I said, showing him our bank statement. "Did you have clients staying there?" James grabbed the statement, his face flushing. It's nothing. Just a business expense that went on the wrong card. I'll transfer the money back. But he never did. Instead, the unexplained charges continued, along with a new secrecy about his schedule. Weekends became particularly strange. James would disappear for hours, claiming he was meeting clients who suddenly needed weekend attention or going to the gym for extended workouts from which he returned without having broken a sweat. My suspicions grew until one Saturday morning, I checked his jacket pockets while he was showering and found a receipt from Boston Harbor Casino for $2,000 in chips, purchased at 1:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when he'd told me he was working late. When I confronted him, his response shocked me. Instead of denying it, James broke down. "It's just a way to blow off steam," he insisted, pacing our bedroom. "The markets have been insane, and sometimes I need to clear my head. By gambling thousands of dollars without telling me. It's my money too," he snapped, an edge entering his voice I'd never heard before. "And it's not like I have a problem. I can stop anytime." "Then stop now," I challenged him. He promised he would. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, so I accepted his word and tried to move forward. For a few weeks, things improved. James came home at reasonable hours. We had dinner together. He seemed present again. Then I found another casino receipt, this time for $5,000. Our argument that night was explosive. James alternated between defensive anger and tearful apologies. Finally, he admitted he'd been gambling regularly for almost a year. "It started as just poker nights with clients," he explained. "Then I started going alone when work got stressful. I'm not losing much, I'm actually up overall." The casino statements I found later proved this was a lie. James had lost over $40,000 in 3 months. Yet the gambling wasn't the worst part, it was how James's behavior toward me changed afterward. Suddenly, he became intensely interested in our finances, insisting on approving every purchase I made, questioning business expenses that had never bothered him before. He changed the passwords on our joint investment accounts for security reasons and became evasive when I asked about our retirement planning. "You focus on your design business," he would say dismissively. "I'll handle the real money decisions." Around this time, Robert began appearing at our home unannounced. I'd come back from my studio to find him and James in intense conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. They took long walks together, speaking in hushed tones. Twice, I overheard fragments of arguments about the plan and whether it was too risky. "Your father seems very involved in our lives lately," I observed one night after Robert had left following another unannounced visit. "He's just concerned," James replied vaguely. "About the markets. About our future. And what exactly is the plan you two keep discussing?" James's head snapped up. "You've been eavesdropping. I've been existing in my own home where you and your father are having secretive conversations. It's nothing for you to worry about. Just some investment strategies." But I was worried, increasingly so. James had become someone I didn't recognize, secretive, controlling, almost paranoid. When I suggested marriage counseling, he looked at me like I'd suggested setting the house on fire. "We don't need some stranger telling us how to communicate," he scoffed. "This is just a rough patch. It happens to everyone." "Does everyone's husband hide gambling debts and have secret financial meetings with his father?" I countered. "You're being paranoid and difficult," James said, using the dismissive tone I'd come to dread. "Maybe you're working too much. That New York office was premature, just like Dad said." That night, lying awake beside a husband who felt like a stranger, I made a decision. If James wouldn't be honest with me, I'd find the truth myself. The next morning, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. I began transferring small amounts from my business profits into it, nothing that would raise immediate alarms, but enough to create a safety net if my growing fears proved justified. I also started documenting everything, copying statements, recording dates and times of James's unexplained absences, saving texts and emails that seemed relevant. Something was happening in my marriage, something orchestrated between James and his father, and for the first time, I allowed myself to consider that it might not be in my best interests. What I couldn't have imagined was just how right those instincts would prove to be, or how deep the betrayal went. 2 months of increasingly suspicious behavior drove me to a decision I never thought I'd make. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I sat in a downtown coffee shop across from Melissa Carter, a private investigator recommended by a divorce attorney friend of my college roommate. I'd told James the first had a client meeting, which wasn't entirely untrue. My marriage had become my most important project, just not in the way he would have assumed. "So you want me to follow your husband," Melissa confirmed, her tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. With her sensible bob and business casual attire, she looked more like an accountant than the stereotypical image of a PI. "I need to know what he's doing during these unexplained absences," I explained, sliding an envelope containing James's photo, his office address, and a list of his usual haunts across the table. "And who he's meeting with?" "You suspect an affair?" Melissa asked directly. I hesitated. "I'm not sure. Maybe. Or maybe something financial. He's been secretive about money, and there's evidence of gambling." Melissa nodded, making notes. "I charge $300 a day plus expenses. I'll need a 3-day retainer to start. My reports will include photographs, times, locations, and identified contacts where possible." I wrote the check without hesitation. Peace of mind, or at least confirmation of my fears, was worth every penny. The first report came 3 days later. James had indeed visited Boston Harbor Casino twice that week, losing approximately $4,000 in total. But he'd also met with a woman named Diana Peters at the Liberty Hotel bar. The photos showed them sitting close, her hand occasionally touching his arm, both of them laughing intimately. In the final image, they were embracing in the parking garage, not quite a romantic kiss, but definitely more than a friendly goodbye. "Who is she?" I asked Melissa during our follow-up meeting. "Executive at Boston National Bank," Melissa explained. "Specializes in international private banking and wealth management." They met twice this week, both times after normal business hours. Financial meetings at upscale hotel bars with attractive banking executives weren't necessarily proof of infidelity, but they certainly didn't look like standard client relationships either. I instructed Melissa to continue her surveillance, expanding the scope to include Robert's movements as well. Meanwhile, I took a calculated risk and scheduled an appointment with Benjamin Gray, a forensic accountant who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. I didn't mention divorce during our initial meeting, positioning it instead as a review of my business finances and personal investments. "I'm concerned about some potential irregularities between my design firm and personal accounts," I explained. "I'd like a comprehensive audit to ensure everything is properly structured." Benjamin was thorough and discreet, requesting access to all my business records, personal accounts, tax returns, and investment portfolios. I provided everything except the accounts James had locked me out of for those. I could only supply the statements I'd managed to save before losing access. 2 weeks later, Benjamin called with urgency in his voice. "Mrs. Wilson, I've found something concerning that we should discuss in person, not over the phone." That afternoon in his office, he laid out a series of transactions that made my stomach drop. Over the past 18 months, nearly $200,000 had been siphoned from my business accounts through a series of seemingly legitimate but fraudulent invoices to shell companies. "These companies don't provide actual services," Benjamin explained, pointing to highlighted entries. "They're paper entities that appear to be vendors or contractors, but the money ultimately flows to this offshore account in the Cayman Islands." "How's this possible?" I asked, stunned. "I approve all major expenses personally. These were structured to fall just under your approval threshold," Benjamin explained. "And someone with administrative access authorized them. This username here." He pointed to a column showing the authorization code. The username belonged to James, who had insisted on helping set up my accounting software as a favor when I expanded the business. "There's more," Benjamin continued grimly. "I've also identified unusual patterns in your joint marital accounts. Systematic transfers moving assets from jointly held investments into accounts where only your husband appears to have signature authority." The evidence was undeniable. James had been embezzling from my business while simultaneously moving our marital assets out of my reach. I felt physically ill, but a strange clarity was also emerging through the shock. Is there anything connecting these activities to Robert Wilson? I asked. Benjamin hesitated. I can't definitively prove his involvement with just these records, but there are some interesting patterns. Several of the shell companies share a registered agent with entities I know to be associated with your father-in-law's law firm. And this offshore structure bears remarkable similarities to strategies I've seen in high-asset divorce cases where Wilson, Hayes, and Blackwell represented the husband. The pieces were falling into place, a picture so ugly I almost couldn't bear to look at it. James wasn't just gambling and possibly having an affair. With Robert's guidance, he was systematically preparing to leave me financially devastated. Melissa's subsequent reports confirmed my worst fears. James had met with Diana Peters 3 more times, their interactions growing increasingly intimate. But he'd also had 4 meetings with his father and a man identified as Gregory Simmons, another partner at Robert's law firm who specialized in divorce cases. They met in a private dining room at the Capitol Grill, Melissa reported, showing me photos of the 3 men entering and leaving the restaurant. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Armed with this information, I made another appointment, this time with Laura Martinez, a divorce attorney known for her aggressive representation of spouses facing financial deception. Based on what you've shown me, Laura said after reviewing my evidence, they're positioning for what we call a surprise divorce, where one spouse secretly prepares for months or years, hiding assets and building a case before blindsiding the other with carefully timed filing. Why would James do this? I asked, still struggling to reconcile the man I married with these calculated deceptions. Financial control, the gambling problem, possibly the other woman, they're all factors, Laura explained. But with your father-in-law's involvement, I suspect it's also about control and family money. Your business is now worth more than James earns, isn't it? I nodded. My latest financial statements showed Mitchell Design Studio valued at nearly $3 million. And let me guess, Robert Wilson never thought you'd be this successful. He saw you as a temporary distraction for his son, not an equal partner building substantial assets of your own. Her assessment cut to the heart of tensions I'd felt but never fully acknowledged. Robert had always treated me like a gold digger despite the fact that I was now generating more income than James. My success threatened his control over his son and the Wilson family narrative. What should I do? I asked Laura. Right now, nothing obvious, she advised. We need more evidence, particularly about the offshore accounts and Robert's direct involvement. If they realize you're onto them, they'll accelerate their plans. Continue working with Melissa and Benjamin, forward everything to me, and start securing copies of all important documents. We'll prepare a counter-strategy, but timing will be crucial. For the next month, I lived a double life, the dutiful wife at home while secretly building a case with my team of professionals. Benjamin traced the money flows to 3 separate offshore accounts and documented numerous instances of financial misconduct. Melissa photographed more meetings between James, Robert, and various financial and legal advisors. Most damning of all, she captured audio of a conversation between father and son in Robert's car, where they explicitly discussed making sure Stephanie gets nothing but her clothes and personal items and the importance of filing first on our timeline. Through it all, I maintained a calm facade at home, pretending I noticed nothing amiss. When James mentioned our upcoming 8th anniversary and suggested we celebrate with his father at the Westbrook Country Club, I smiled and agreed it would be lovely. Dad's really looking forward to it, James said, an odd glint in his eye. He's insisting on hosting us. Says he has something special planned. I bet he does, I thought. But so do I. The night before our anniversary dinner, I finalized preparations with Laura. All evidence was securely copied and stored in multiple locations. Affidavits from Benjamin and Melissa were notarized and ready. A comprehensive counter-proposal for divorce settlement had been drafted, one that would ensure fair division of assets and appropriate consequences for financial misconduct. Are you ready for this? Laura asked as we reviewed the final documents. I thought about the 8 years I'd invested in a marriage that had become a sham, about the husband who had stolen from me, about the father-in-law who had always seen me as disposable. More than ready, I replied, placing everything in a simple manila envelope. It's time for the Wilsons to learn I'm not as easily manipulated as they thought. Our anniversary fell on a Tuesday, but Robert insisted we celebrate the Saturday before at the Westbrook Country Club. I've arranged something special, he told James over the phone. I pretended to be engrossed in a design magazine while listening to every word. The private dining room overlooking the golf course. 7 o'clock. Tell Stephanie to dress appropriately. That last instruction, delivered with Robert's characteristic condescension, almost made me laugh. If only he knew how appropriately I had been preparing. The week leading up to our anniversary dinner was a carefully choreographed dance. During the day, I met with Laura, reviewing our strategy one final time and ensuring all evidence was properly documented and securely stored. Remember, Laura cautioned during our last meeting, no matter what they say or do, maintain your composure. The moment you show emotion is the moment they'll try to seize control of the narrative. I've been maintaining my composure for months, I reminded her. What's one more evening? In the evenings, I played the role of unsuspecting wife, accepting James's sudden attentiveness with a smile that never reached my eyes. He brought home flowers on Wednesday, the first spontaneous bouquet in at least 2 years, and suggested we take a weekend trip to Nantucket once things settle down at work. That sounds wonderful, I replied, knowing there was no Nantucket in our future. Perhaps in the fall when the crowds thin out. On Thursday, I met one last time with Benjamin Gray to review the financial evidence package. I've prepared duplicate records of everything, he assured me, handing me a USB drive. The forensic audit trail is clear and impossible to dispute. The transfers from your business accounts alone constitute embezzlement, which has both civil and potential criminal implications. And Robert's involvement? The shell companies used to siphon funds from your business share the same registered agent as companies previously established by Robert's law firm. 2 of the fraudulent vendor names match entities used in past divorce cases where Robert represented the husband. It's circumstantial but compelling, especially combined with the recorded conversations your investigator obtained. Friday brought my final meeting with Melissa, who provided a comprehensive timeline of James's activities over the past 2 months, complete with photographs, location data, and transcripts of recorded conversations where legally obtained. There's something you should know before tomorrow, Melissa said, hesitating slightly. Diana Peters isn't just a banker. Based on my investigation, she's been romantically involved with your husband for approximately 4 months, and she's directly involved in managing the offshore accounts where your marital assets have been transferred. I absorbed this information with surprising calm. The confirmation of James's affair should have hurt more, but it felt almost irrelevant compared to the larger betrayal. Is there evidence she knows about the plan to blindside me with divorce? Melissa nodded. There's a recording from 2 weeks ago. They were in her car, discussing the timeline. She asked if you suspected anything, and he assured her you were completely clueless. His words, not mine. That night, I carefully selected my outfit for the dinner, a tailored red dress that projected confidence and power, with pockets deep enough to discreetly hold a recording device. I packed the manila envelope containing all my evidence into a new black leather handbag large enough to accommodate it without looking suspicious. As I prepared, James paced our bedroom, checking his phone repeatedly. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Fine, just a work thing, he muttered, though I knew he hadn't been at the office all day. According to Melissa's report, he'd spent 3 hours at Robert's house, then visited his attorney's office, and finally met Diana at her apartment for 90 minutes before coming home. You seem tense, I observed. Aren't you looking forward to our anniversary dinner? James attempted a smile that came across as more of a grimace. Of course. 8 years is a big milestone. If only he knew what a milestone it would truly be. The next morning, the day of our dinner, I woke early and took a long walk along the Charles River, mentally rehearsing every possible scenario for the evening ahead. By the time I returned home, I felt centered and prepared. The stakes couldn't be higher, but for the first time in months, I was taking control of my own narrative. James spent most of the day making phone calls from his home office, the door firmly closed. I caught fragments of conversations, everything's in place, and she doesn't suspect anything. That confirmed what I already knew. Tonight was meant to be an ambush, a public humiliation disguised as an anniversary celebration. At 6 o'clock, I began getting ready, taking extra care with my appearance. The red dress fit perfectly, projecting confidence rather than festivity. I applied my makeup precisely, opting for a bold red lip that matched the dress. My hair was swept into an elegant updo that exposed the diamond earrings James had given me on our first anniversary, a fitting touch of irony for the evening ahead. When I emerged from our bedroom, James did a double take. "You look intense," he said, adjusting his tie nervously. "Thank you," I replied with a smile. It is a special occasion, after all. The drive to the Westbrook was mostly silent. James kept checking his phone at red lights, typing quick responses to texts I could only assume were from his father or their legal team, confirming the evening's plan was on track. "Dad's really looking forward to tonight," James said as we pulled into the parking lot. "He's been planning it for weeks." "I'm sure he has," I murmured, my hand resting on my purse where the envelope waited. "It's thoughtful of him to take such an interest in our anniversary." The Westbrook Country Club exuded old money and exclusivity from every polished surface. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, illuminating oil paintings of past club presidents, all men, all white, all wearing the same self-satisfied expression I'd seen on Robert's face countless times. A uniformed staff member greeted us by name and escorted us to the private dining room where Robert waited. "The honored couple arrives," Robert announced as we entered, rising from his seat with a glass of champagne already in hand. At 68, he remained imposingly fit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit highlighting his athletic build. "Happy anniversary to you both." I noted he'd positioned himself at the head of the table, relegating James and me to seats on either side, a small but telling symbol of who he believed was in control of the situation. "Thank you for arranging this, Robert," I said, allowing the staff to seat me. "It's very thoughtful." "Only the best for family," he replied with a thin smile that didn't touch his eyes. "I've taken the liberty of ordering champagne, Dom Perignon 2008, an excellent vintage." As the waiter poured, I noticed Robert and James exchanging glances, a silent communication passing between them. My husband looked pale and fidgety, constantly adjusting his tie and silverware. Robert, by contrast, appeared almost eager, a predator anticipating the moment to pounce. "A toast," Robert declared, raising his glass. "To 8 years of marriage. May all parties receive what they truly deserve." The double meaning wasn't subtle. I sipped the champagne, maintaining eye contact with Robert over the rim of my glass. "To getting what we deserve," I echoed. I couldn't agree more. Dinner progressed with superficial pleasantries. Robert dominated the conversation, reminiscing about James's childhood achievements and the Wilson family legacy. I played along, smiling at appropriate moments while observing the increasing tension in James's shoulders. He barely touched his steak, pushing it around his plate while throwing nervous glances at his watch. As dessert was served, tiramisu for the gentlemen, chocolate mousse for me. Robert set down his fork and reached beside his chair, producing a leather portfolio embossed with his law firm's logo. "Before we conclude our celebration," he said, his tone shifting to the authoritative voice he likely used in courtrooms, "there's an important matter to address." James stared fixedly at his dessert, unable to meet my eyes. Robert continued, sliding the portfolio across the table toward me. "Stephanie, I've always believed in directness. It's no secret that your integration into the Wilson family has been challenging. James has come to recognize that this marriage no longer serves his best interests, and as his father, I support his decision to end it." He opened the portfolio, revealing a thick document with petition for dissolution of marriage clearly visible at the top. "Inside you'll find a settlement offer that's more than generous, given the circumstances. I suggest you review it with an attorney of your choosing, though I can provide recommendations if needed." The moment I'd anticipated for months had finally arrived. Robert's smug expression, James's cowardly avoidance of eye contact, it was exactly the scene they had planned. Robert continued his rehearsed speech, his voice dripping with false concern. "We thought it best to handle this privately, as a family, rather than having you served at your place of business. The settlement offers 3 months of support while you transition and relocate. You can keep your personal effects, of course, and your business, what remains of it. James has been generous in not pursuing any claims related to certain financial irregularities we've identified." The audacity was breathtaking. They were framing me as the financial wrongdoer, creating a narrative where James was being generous by not pursuing claims against me, when in reality, he had been systematically embezzling from my company for months. James finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's for the best, Stephanie. This way is easier for everyone." Robert nodded approvingly at his son before turning back to me with a harder edge. "I should mention that resistance would be ill-advised. We've documented numerous instances of business impropriety that would be damaging to your professional reputation. A contested divorce would become very public, very quickly." He was threatening me, making it clear that if I didn't accept their terms, they would not only take everything but also destroy my professional reputation in the process. It was the culmination of a plan months or perhaps years in the making: isolate me, undermine me, then discard me with nothing. I took a deep breath and picked up the document, methodically turning pages and reading key sections while they watched. I could feel their anticipation, their expectation of tears or pleading or angry outbursts. Instead, I carefully reviewed every word, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. Finally, I closed the portfolio and looked up, first at James and then at Robert. "I see," I said calmly. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this." Robert's smile widened, sensing victory. "As I said, we wanted to handle this as civilly as possible." "That's thoughtful," I replied, reaching for my handbag. "And since we're being so civil and direct with each other, I have something for you as well." The Westbrooks' private dining room suddenly felt charged with tension as I reached into my handbag and withdrew my own manila envelope. Robert's expression flickered between confusion and amusement as I placed it on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, making no move to touch it. "Some kind of counteroffer?" "I should warn you that our terms are non-negotiable." "It's not a counteroffer," I replied calmly, sliding the envelope toward him. "It's evidence." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing between his father and me with growing anxiety. "Evidence of what?" I maintained eye contact with Robert, whose confident expression had begun to falter. "Why don't you open it and find out?" With deliberate slowness, I activated the recording device in my pocket. Whatever happened next, I wanted it documented. Robert picked up the envelope with visible reluctance. "This is unnecessary, Stephanie. We're offering you a clean break." "Open it," I repeated, my voice firm but controlled. With a dismissive shrug meant to convey this was all a waste of his valuable time, Robert opened the envelope and began examining its contents. I watched as his face transformed, confidence giving way to surprise, then disbelief, and finally, something I'd never seen there before: fear. The first document was a detailed forensic accounting report showing nearly $200,000 systematically embezzled from my business accounts through fraudulent invoices authorized by James's login credentials. "What is this nonsense?" Robert blustered, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed him. "Keep going," I encouraged. "There's much more." The next set of papers documented the systematic transfer of our marital assets to offshore accounts accessible only to James. Benjamin had meticulously traced every transaction, highlighting the dates, amounts, and destination accounts. These offshore structures, I noted conversationally, bear a striking resemblance to those used in the Hopkins divorce case your firm handled in 2019. The same registered agents, the same Cayman Islands banks. Benjamin found that particularly interesting. Robert's face had drained of color. "Who the hell is Benjamin?" "Benjamin Gray. Forensic accountant specializing in high-net-worth divorces. He'll be providing expert testimony if necessary." I nodded toward the folder. "Please continue." James had abandoned any pretense of composure. "Stephanie, what have you done?" "What have I done?" I repeated, turning to face my husband directly for the first time. I protected myself when it became clear you were planning to destroy me. Keep reading, Robert. The next section concerns your direct involvement. Robert flipped to the next document and froze. It was a transcript of a conversation between him and James, recorded in Robert's car 3 weeks earlier. Robert. The offshore transfers are nearly complete. Once the last Wilson Properties shares move next week, we'll be ready to file. James, and you're sure she can't trace anything? Stephanie's not stupid. Robert. That's why we've been building the narrative about her financial mismanagement. If she fights, we leak the fabricated evidence to her clients. No one will hire a designer who embezzles from her own projects. She'll be ruined professionally. James, and we're still filing at the anniversary dinner. Robert. Perfect timing. Public enough to control her reaction, private enough to contain it. She'll be blindsided, emotional, unable to think clearly. By Monday morning, we'll have frozen her access to everything that matters. Robert slammed the papers down. This recording is illegal. You can't. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings, I interrupted smoothly. As my attorney has confirmed, these recordings are perfectly admissible in court. And with the Ethics Committee of the Massachusetts Bar Association. I reached across the table and flipped to the next document, photographs of James and Diana Peters embracing outside her apartment building, entering and leaving hotels, dining intimately in secluded restaurants. Diana's involvement in managing the offshore accounts while simultaneously engaged in an affair with my husband creates some interesting legal questions about conspiracy and professional ethics, doesn't it? James had gone completely white. You had me followed. For months, I confirmed. Melissa is extremely thorough. Robert attempted to regain control, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. Whatever you think you have here is circumstantial at best. These could be business meetings. I cut him off by sliding my phone across the table, screen illuminated with a text exchange between James and Diana from just 2 days ago. James, everything's set for Saturday. Dad's handling the divorce filing. After it's done, we'll have the Cayman funds and can start looking at properties in Malibu. Diana, she suspects nothing? You're sure? James, completely clueless. In a week this will all be over, and we can stop sneaking around. Robert's hands shook as he pushed the phone away. What exactly do you want, Stephanie? Money? Is that it? Some kind of blackmail. I reclaimed my phone and gathered the documents back into the envelope. What I want is very simple, and it's all outlined in the final document you haven't yet reviewed. I extracted the last paper myself, a counter-proposal for divorce settlement prepared by Laura Martinez, and placed it before them. My terms are straightforward. First, a truly equitable division of marital assets, including retrieval of all funds improperly transferred offshore. Second, James will enter treatment for his gambling addiction. Third, you, Robert, will recuse yourself entirely from these proceedings. No legal advice, no financial assistance, no interference whatsoever. I paused, ensuring I had their complete attention. If these terms aren't agreeable, my next call will be to the district attorney's office regarding the embezzlement from my company, followed by calls to the Massachusetts Bar Association concerning Robert's ethics violations, the Banking Commission regarding Diana's actions, and finally, a conversation with your law firm's other partners about how their senior partner conspired to commit financial fraud. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he processed the complete reversal of power that had just occurred. James stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. You wouldn't dare, Robert finally managed, but the usual authority had vanished from his voice. I've provided my evidence to 3 separate attorneys, with instructions to proceed if anything happens to me or if these proceedings don't advance according to Massachusetts law, I replied. I've also arranged for all documentation to be delivered to your law partners and the relevant authorities if I don't check in regularly with my legal team. I stood up, smoothing my red dress. You have 48 hours to accept my terms or present a counteroffer my attorney deems reasonable. After that, I cannot guarantee the confidentiality of any of this information. Robert's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. You think you can threaten me? Do you have any idea who I am in this town? I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. I know exactly who you are, Robert. The question is, do you want everyone else to know too? James finally found his voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. Stephanie, please. We can talk about this. We're well past talking, James. For months, you've been planning to leave me destitute while stealing from my business and sleeping with the woman helping you hide our assets. What exactly should we talk about? Dad, James turned desperately to his father. Tell her we can work something out. Tell her. Robert had always been the one with all the answers, the mastermind with contingency plans for every scenario. But as he sat there, surrounded by irrefutable evidence of his orchestrated deception, even the great Robert Wilson appeared lost for words. You've been controlling your son's life for 38 years, I told him quietly. You never thought I was good enough for him, never believed I belonged in your family. You saw my success as a threat rather than something to celebrate. And when it became clear I wouldn't be controlled, you decided I needed to be destroyed. I gathered my purse and the manila envelope. I'm not the naive girl you met 8 years ago, Robert. I've learned a great deal from watching you operate, perhaps more than you intended to teach. As I turned to leave, James made one last desperate attempt. Stephanie, wait. You can't just walk away. What about our marriage? What about everything we built together? I paused at the door, looking back at the two men who had planned to dismantle my life over tiramisu. You already ended our marriage, James. I'm just ensuring it concludes on my terms, not yours. With that, I walked out of the private dining room, head held high, leaving behind the stunned silence of men who had severely underestimated the woman they thought they could easily discard. The 48 hours following my departure from the Westbrook were surprisingly quiet. I had expected immediate pushback, angry phone calls, threats, perhaps even a preemptive legal filing to try to regain control of the narrative. Instead, there was silence. I spent Sunday in my office, surrounded by fabric samples and project boards, deliberately immersing myself in the creative work that had become my sanctuary. My phone remained silent until precisely 5 p.m. on Monday, when an email arrived from Gregory Simmons, Robert's law partner. The message was brief and formal. Mrs. Wilson, we would like to schedule a meeting to discuss the matters raised on Saturday evening. Please advise if 11 a.m. tomorrow at our offices would be convenient. Robert Wilson will not be present, as per your stipulation. I forwarded the email to Laura Martinez, who responded within minutes. They're scrambling. The absence of Robert is telling. They're already conceding to your first demand. I'll clear my schedule to accompany you. Remember, this is just the beginning of negotiations. Stay strong. The next morning, dressed in a conservative navy suit that projected competence and control, I arrived at the offices of Wilson, Hayes, and Blackwell with Laura at my side. We were escorted not to a conference room, but to Gregory Simmons' private office, another small but significant indication of how seriously they were taking the situation. Gregory rose as we entered, his expression carefully neutral. James sat in an armchair by the window, looking as though he hadn't slept in days. A third man introduced himself as Edward Chambers, the firm's managing partner. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Wilson, Gregory began after introductions were complete. We've reviewed the materials you provided on Saturday and would like to discuss a resolution that might satisfy all parties. Laura placed her briefcase on the table. Before we begin, I want to confirm that Robert Wilson will remain removed from these proceedings, as my client requested. Edward Chambers nodded gravely. Robert has recused himself from this matter entirely. In fact, he's taken a leave of absence from the firm, effective immediately, pending our internal review of the situation. This was an unexpected development, one that suggested the other partners were distancing themselves from Robert's actions. I kept my expression neutral, but inwardly, I recognized this as our first significant victory. We've prepared a response to your proposed settlement, Gregory continued, sliding a document across the table. You'll find we've accepted many of your terms, with some modifications we hope you'll find reasonable. Laura reviewed the document methodically, occasionally making notes, but revealing nothing in her expression. Finally, she passed it to me with several sections highlighted. Their counteroffer accepted the equal division of marital assets, including retrieval of the offshore funds, though they proposed a slightly different distribution timeline. They agreed to James entering gambling addiction treatment, but requested confidentiality provisions regarding that aspect. Most significantly, they had included a mutual non-disclosure agreement covering the circumstances of our divorce, clearly aimed at protecting both James and the firm from public scandal. The non-disclosure terms are expansive, Laura noted. My client would be prohibited from discussing not only the embezzlement and asset concealment, but also any misconduct by members of your firm. Edward leaned forward, his fingers steepled. We believe discretion benefits everyone involved. Mrs. Wilson's professional reputation remains intact, as does the standing of all parties concerned. And what assurances do we have that the fraudulent narrative about my client's alleged financial mismanagement has been completely abandoned? Laura countered. We can include explicit language confirming no such claims exist or will be pursued, Gregory offered too quickly, revealing their eagerness to resolve the matter. Throughout this exchange, James had remained silent, staring out the window at the Boston skyline. Now he finally spoke, his voice hollow. I want to say something to Stephanie. Directly. Laura turned to me with a raised eyebrow, leaving the decision in my hands. I nodded once. James struggled to meet my eyes. I know, sorry, doesn't begin to cover what I've done. There's no excuse. The gambling got out of control, and then Dad convinced me we needed to protect the family assets, and somehow that turned into. He gestured helplessly at the documents on the table. I got lost. Between Dad's expectations and my own mistakes, I just got lost. And Diana? I asked, my first words since entering the office. James flinched. Another mistake. She's a client at the bank. She helped with the offshore accounts and things developed. You were planning to move to Malibu together after leaving me with nothing, I reminded him, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. I don't expect your forgiveness, James said quietly. But I want you to know I'm accepting full responsibility for the embezzlement. The firm will arrange full restitution to your company, with interest. It was never your fault. None of it was your fault. It was perhaps the first completely honest thing he'd said to me in years, and despite everything, I felt a small measure of relief in hearing him acknowledge the truth. There's one more thing, Edward Chambers interjected. Regarding Robert. His actions in this matter have raised serious ethical concerns for our partnership. The evidence you provided suggests potential violations of professional conduct that we cannot ignore. While we're still determining the appropriate response, we wanted you to know that we do not condone or support his behavior. This was far more than I had expected, the prestigious law firm distancing itself from its founding partner based on my evidence. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Laura and I requested a brief recess to discuss their counterproposal privately. In a small conference room down the hall, she turned to me with a rare smile. They're running scared, she observed. The managing partner wouldn't be here if they weren't deeply concerned about potential damage to the firm. We can push for more favorable terms on the asset division. I considered this, then shook my head. The current terms are fair. What I want to modify is the non-disclosure agreement. I'll agree not to publicly discuss the specific details of the embezzlement and offshore accounts, but I want explicit language confirming my right to speak about the divorce itself and the fact that James was unfaithful. Laura raised an eyebrow. May I ask why that distinction matters? Because marriages end for many reasons, I explained. I don't need or want to destroy James or the firm publicly, but I refuse to become the subject of speculation and gossip, with people wondering what I did wrong or whether I somehow failed to keep my husband interested. The truth is simpler. He cheated and he stole. I won't elaborate beyond that in public, but I won't pretend it didn't happen either. Laura nodded, making notes. That's reasonable and achievable. Anything else? I thought about Robert, his years of condescension, his calculated plan to leave me destitute, his fundamental belief that I was disposable. One addition to the settlement. I want a written apology from Robert Wilson acknowledging his interference in our marriage and his role in planning to deprive me of marital assets. Not for publication, just for me. They may resist that, Laura cautioned. Robert won't want any written admission of wrongdoing. Then we walk, I said simply. Everything else is negotiable. That isn't. When we returned to Gregory's office, Laura presented our modifications clearly and concisely. The attorneys exchanged glances at the mention of Robert's written apology, but to my surprise, it was James who spoke up. She deserves that much, he said firmly, looking directly at Edward Chambers. My father needs to acknowledge what he did. Edward's expression tightened, but he nodded. We'll convey the request. Given the circumstances, I believe he'll comply. The meeting concluded with handshakes all around, a surreal formality given the circumstances. As Laura and I prepared to leave, James approached me one last time. For what it's worth, he said quietly, standing up to my father like this, it's the first time I've seen anyone truly beat him at his own game. Including me. I studied the man I had loved for a decade, still handsome, still familiar, but now revealed as fundamentally weaker than I had ever understood him to be. It wasn't a game to me, James. It was my life. 3 days later, I received a FedEx package containing all the signed documents formalizing our agreement, including a sealed envelope addressed to me in Robert's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single page on his personal stationery. Stephanie, I underestimated you. That was my mistake. I have built a career on assessing others' weaknesses and exploiting them to my client's advantage. I saw your background, your profession, and your independence as weaknesses to be leveraged against you. I failed to recognize them as sources of strength. My interference in your marriage was inappropriate, and my efforts to deprive you of your rightful marital assets were both unethical and wrong. I allow few people to outmaneuver me. You have earned that distinction. Robert Wilson. It wasn't exactly warm, and certainly not apologetic in the traditional sense, but from a man like Robert Wilson, this acknowledgement of defeat was perhaps the closest thing to genuine respect he was capable of expressing. I folded the letter and placed it in my safe, not as a treasured memento, but as the final documentation of a chapter in my life that was now closing. The divorce proceedings moved forward without further drama. James entered treatment for his gambling addiction. The offshore accounts were repatriated and divided according to our agreement. My business continued to thrive, with the embezzled funds fully restored. Robert Wilson took an extended leave of absence from his firm, ostensibly for health reasons. The legal community buzzed with speculation, but the details remained confidential as agreed. 6 months later, I heard through mutual connections that he had relocated to Florida and retired from active practice. As for Diana Peters, the Banking Commission launched a quiet investigation into her professional conduct. She resigned from Boston National Bank shortly thereafter, her career in high-net-worth financial management effectively over. The final divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after that fateful anniversary dinner. I signed them in Laura's office, feeling neither joy nor sadness, only a profound sense of closure. "What will you do now?" Laura asked as we shared a celebratory glass of champagne. I smiled, thinking of the new commercial project I had just landed in New York and the renovations planned for my Boston brownstone, now solely in my name. "I'm going to do exactly what I've always done," I replied. "Design beautiful spaces, build my business, and live my life on my terms. The only difference is that now there's no one trying to undermine me while I do it." Laura raised her glass. "To living life on your terms." I clinked my glass against hers. "And to always having an envelope ready when you need one." 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I found myself standing in an empty penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. The space was raw and unfinished, concrete floors, exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the panoramic water view. It had been on the market for months, overpriced and overlooked, until my offer was accepted the previous week. "Are you sure about this?" my assistant Zoe asked, surveying the massive renovation project ahead of us. "It's going to be at least 6 months of construction." I smiled, already visualizing the transformation. "I'm sure. This is exactly what I need." The penthouse represented more than just a new home. It was a symbol of my fresh start. I had kept the brownstone through the divorce settlement, my legal right since I'd paid for most of it with my business profits, but after everything that had happened there, it never felt quite like mine anymore. Each room held memories of James, of our life together, of the lies that had accumulated within those walls. This new space was entirely mine to reimagine, with no history but the one I would create. The divorce proceedings had concluded smoothly, all things considered. James had honored our agreement, accepting his responsibilities without further resistance. The last I'd heard, he was still attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and had taken a reduced role at his investment firm while continuing therapy. We communicated only through attorneys now, our direct interactions limited to signing final documents. While part of me appreciated his efforts at rehabilitation, I recognized them as James's journey, not mine. My healing would take a different path. That path began with a referral from Laura Martinez to Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma. In our first session, I resisted the label. "I'm actually doing remarkably well," I insisted, sitting stiffly in her comfortably appointed office. "The divorce is proceeding on my terms. My business is thriving. I've never been in a stronger position professionally." Dr. Jenkins nodded, her expression kind but knowing. "All of that can be true while still acknowledging that you've experienced significant trauma. Success and suffering aren't mutually exclusive, Stephanie." Over the following weeks, I gradually allowed myself to explore the full emotional impact of James's betrayal. The therapy sessions became a safe space to examine feelings I'd been too busy strategizing to fully process. The shock of discovering his affair, the violation of learning he'd stolen from my business, the profound disillusionment of realizing our entire marriage had been built on an uneven foundation. I keep thinking about all the red flags I ignored, I confessed during one particularly difficult session. All the times I made excuses for his behavior or Robert's interference. How could I have been so blind? "That's a common reaction," Dr. Jenkins assured me. "But remember, you weren't blind, you were trusting. James and Robert deliberately deceived you, using your trust against you. That's on them, not you." Gradually, I began reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during the turmoil of the past few years. My college roommate Natalie visited from Chicago, bringing wine and unfiltered opinions. "I never liked him," she admitted as we sat on my balcony overlooking the city. "James always seemed like he was playing a role rather than being himself. But you were so happy, and I wanted to be supportive. You could have said something," I pointed out, not really angry but curious. Natalie shrugged. "Would you have listened? You were determined to make it work, especially after Robert made it clear he thought you weren't good enough. You saw it as a challenge." Her observation struck a chord. I had approached my relationship with the Wilson family as something to achieve rather than evaluate, determined to prove my worth to a man who had decided my value before ever knowing me. Professional success continued to be my most reliable anchor. Mitchell Design Studio expanded to 15 employees between the Boston and New York offices. A high-profile restaurant renovation in Manhattan was featured in Architectural Digest for the second time, bringing a wave of new clients. I hired a COO to manage daily operations, allowing me to focus exclusively on creative direction and client relationships. "Your business instincts have always been exceptional," Benjamin Gray remarked during our quarterly review. "But I've noticed even stronger financial boundaries in place since the divorce." It was true. I had implemented rigorous new financial controls, with multiple approval layers for all transactions and regular external audits. No one, including me, had unilateral access to company funds anymore. The systems were partly practical protection, partly psychological reassurance that no one could ever exploit my business again. The most unexpected development in my post-divorce life came 6 months after finalization, when I received an email from Catherine Wilson, James's younger sister. "Stephanie, I've wanted to reach out for months, but wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from anyone with the Wilson name attached. I was heartbroken to learn what James and Dad did to you. While it doesn't change anything, I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family condoned their actions. If you're ever open to coffee, I'd love to reconnect. No pressure either way. Warmly, Kate." Catherine and I had always gotten along well, though Robert had effectively limited our relationship, seemingly threatened by the alliance of two women he couldn't easily control. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe halfway between our offices. "Dad's furious that I'm seeing you," Catherine confessed within minutes of sitting down. "He's basically forbidden any family contact." I stirred my latte unsurprised. "And yet, here you are." She smiled, the same charming Wilson smile that had once captivated me on James's face, but without the underlying weakness I now recognized had always been there. "I've spent 35 years under Dad's thumb. Watching you stand up to him was inspirational, honestly. The way the whole family tiptoes around him, afraid to upset the great Robert Wilson, it's exhausting. You're the first person who ever truly called his bluff." Our coffee turned into dinner, and over the following months, Catherine became an unexpected friend and ally. She provided insights into the Wilson family dynamics that helped me make sense of James's behavior. The crushing expectations, the conditional approval, the fear of disappointment that drove both Wilson children to prioritize their father's approval above all else. "I'm not excusing what James did," Catherine clarified during one of our conversations. "He made his choices. But growing up with Dad as your moral compass, it warps your perspective on right and wrong." Through Catherine, I learned that my divorce had triggered broader repercussions within the Wilson family structure. Robert's standing at his firm had been permanently damaged, with the partnership quietly investigating other cases he had handled for potential ethical violations. James had finally begun establishing boundaries with his father, partly through his therapy work. The family dynasty Robert had so carefully controlled was showing cracks at every seam. I took no pleasure in their difficulties, but found a certain peace in knowing that systems built on manipulation eventually collapsed under their own weight. 1 year after the divorce, I joined a support group for women who had experienced similar betrayals in their marriages. The stories shared in that circle of gaslighting, financial abuse, elaborate deceptions helped normalize my experience and diminish the lingering shame I still sometimes felt for not having recognized what was happening sooner. "The most important thing I've learned," shared Monica, a corporate attorney whose ex-husband had hidden assets in her own parents' names without their knowledge, "is that forgiving yourself isn't the same as excusing what they did. You can acknowledge your blind spots without taking responsibility for their choices." Her words resonated deeply. I had been struggling with that very distinction, how to learn from my experience without blaming myself for trusting someone who had worked methodically to appear trustworthy. As the second year of my post-divorce life began, I found myself settling into a new normal that felt increasingly comfortable. The penthouse renovation was completed, creating a space that perfectly expressed my aesthetic and lifestyle, open, light-filled, with clean lines and carefully curated art pieces, many from female artists whose work centered on themes of resilience and transformation. My business continued to expand, with a third office opening in Chicago under Zoe's leadership. I began mentoring young female designers, particularly those from backgrounds similar to mine, women without family wealth or connections who were building careers through talent and determination alone. James reached out only once during this period, sending a brief email on what would have been our 10th anniversary. "Stephanie, I won't intrude on your life or expect a response. I just wanted to say that I'm continuing to work on myself and understand the harm I caused. The person I was with you. Influenced by Dad, afraid to stand on my own isn't who I want to be. You deserved so much better. I hope you found happiness. James." I read the message twice, then archived it without responding. His journey toward redemption was his own to walk, just as my path toward healing was mine. Our roads had diverged permanently at that anniversary dinner 2 years earlier, and I had no desire to revisit the intersection. On a crisp fall evening, as I hosted a small dinner party in my penthouse for close friends and colleagues, Natalie raised her glass for a toast. "To Stephanie," she said, "who rebuilt her life from scratch and created something even more beautiful than before. Your strength continues to inspire all of us." As glasses clinked around my dining table, I gazed at the people gathered there, true friends, respected colleagues, connections formed through genuine mutual appreciation rather than obligation or advantage. I thought about the woman I had been 3 years earlier, desperately trying to earn approval from people who had already decided I wasn't worthy of it. The greatest gift of the entire ordeal had been rediscovering my own worth, not as James Wilson's wife or Robert Wilson's daughter-in-law, not as the girl from Boston who had married up, but simply as myself, Stephanie Mitchell, designer, businesswoman, friend, survivor. Later that night, after my guests had departed, I stood on my balcony overlooking the harbor lights, breathing in the cool autumn air. The journey from that anniversary dinner to this moment had been arduous, painful, and at times seemingly impossible. Yet here I stood, stronger and more certain of myself than I had ever been during my marriage. I had learned that betrayal doesn't define you, your response to it does. That trusting someone isn't weakness, even when that trust proves misplaced. That starting over isn't failure, but sometimes the bravest choice available. And perhaps most importantly, that the most valuable relationships in life are those that celebrate your strength rather than exploit your vulnerabilities. My envelope at that anniversary dinner had changed everything, but the real transformation hadn't been in exposing James and Robert's scheme. It had been in reclaiming my power and deciding, finally, to write my own story rather than accepting the limited role they had tried to assign me. As I watched the moonlight glinting on the harbor waters, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. Not because I would choose to relive it, but because I had emerged from it with a clearer understanding of my own resilience and worth. Some people spend their entire lives trying to earn approval from those who will never give it freely. I had learned to approve of myself, to trust my own judgment, to build a life aligned with my values rather than someone else's expectations. That was a freedom worth every moment of pain it had taken to achieve. Have you ever had to start over after betrayal or discovered your own strength in an unexpected way? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone who might need a reminder that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the beginning of something much better. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, always keep your important documents handy, just in case you need to pull out an envelope of your own someday.